So let's all welcome Dr. Cornelio Banaag Jr.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff and Lisa. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Actually, I feel happy and privileged to be able to carry on this kind of conversation with our Australian friends. In the course of this morning's lecture, we'll be talking about the mental health crisis that many young people go through, which had actually antedated the pandemic, meaning there has been this crisis going on before the pandemic. Then we'll be talking about the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on the mental health of this generation we call Generation Z. And after that, we'll talk about the parents and the role of parents and how parents can help mitigate the stresses that young people go through. So, stay with me. Let's start. This is the mental health crisis among children and adolescents. But first, I want to start with the mantra of the World Health Organization that there is no health without mental health. And what do we mean by mental health, especially among young people? This is the positive state of physical and emotional well-being that will allow the young person to successfully realize his potentials as he goes through the different developmental stages and marked by the development of emotional milestones, healthy social skills, effective coping skills, and we all know that mentally healthy children and youth can function well in school, at home, and in their community. And yet, ironically, there has been a growing crisis in the mental health of young people. In 2013, the World Health Organization released a fact sheet that pointed out to the alarming global increase in mental health problems. The WHO estimated that anywhere from 10 to 20% of children and adolescents around the world suffer from various forms of mental disorders. That's a big number, you know. If we take it, let's say, in the population of the Philippines, we are now 110 million, and 47%, close to 50%, are young people, 24 years old and below, which is included in the definition of children and youth. If we take just 10%, we have close to 5 million people, young people, who are assuming that they are suffering from some kind of mental health problems. And WHO also emphasized that in about 50% of mental disorders in adults, it began when they were 14, but did not get recognized until they were grown up and the problems have become complicated. And the risk of suicide is highest in the ages 15 to 24 as the youth. Why did this happen? What happened? We did not see anything like this in previous generations. Well, this is probably one of the major things that had happened. Anywhere you go in the world, this kind of scene is very common. Young people had begun to be enamored by their own cell phone. They spend a lot of time with their own cell phones and not talking to one another. This is a picture I took of young people in a mall in one major city in the south of the Philippines, in Mindanao, where I was supposed to lecture. The mall was surprisingly quiet, and when I look around, all the tables and chairs are filled up by young people who are manipulating their cell phones, not talking with each other. I stayed for a while hoping some people will talk, and no, they're all engaged with their cell phone. Is there a correlation? Is there a relationship between the smartphones and the state of mental health of young people? Let's take a look at this. The smartphones came out in 2007. 3 or 4 years after, by 2010, 2011, there were notable changes in the behavior of young people. They are meeting up less and less, and there is less and less eye contact. They spend more time with the internet and social media than they do with person-to-person conversations. And they are increasingly becoming insecure and less religious. And many declare higher levels of stress. And then this sudden increase in mental health disorders, enough for WHO to release the fact sheet in 2013. I am pleased to have received this from our group in Australia. I summarize some of the concerns of the youth in Australia. When asked what are the important issues for them, two came out outstandingly: mental health and environment. And when asked about their own personal concerns, again, the same themes: coping with stress, school or study-related problems, and again, the state of mental health. Seems like the common themes go around the world, the common themes of young people's concern. Now, in 2017, a psychologist in the United States by the name of Jean Twenge, you can Google her, you can see her in the YouTube giving lectures, came up with this interesting book called iGen, with the subtitle that says, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. That last phrase, completely unprepared for adulthood, I kind of have a disagreement with that, because let's not assume that the future of these young children will be the same future that you and I know that we live right now. These young people are creating a future where there will be a fit with them. The same author had also written an article in the Atlantic magazine, an internationally highly respected magazine, with the title, Has the Smartphone Destroyed a Generation? Intriguing. There are many reactions, pros and cons to this article, which you can also search. She prefers to call this generation the iGen, and we will find out soon. These are the people who were born in 1995 and later, and 1 year after the publication of her book, the first wave of this generation would have been about 24 years old, 23 years old, and by now they must be 24 and 25 years old, is still well within the definition of youth by WHO. This generation grew up with the cell phone, the Instagram page, before even starting high school. And they do not remember a time before the internet. They were born into the internet. And Twenge prefers to call them iGen because many of their attributes begin with the letter I. In no hurry. They're not in a hurry to grow up. They still go with their parents to the mall instead of going with their peers. And there are several markers of growing up, but one of the most common marker is this urgent wish to drive a car, to own a license, a driving license. And you know what? In this generation, they were not interested to drive. I see now young adults who still don't know how to drive, had gone through this generation without insisting that they learn how to drive. They spend a lot of their lives in the internet, and they are in person no more, as we pointed out. There are less and less eye-to-eye contact because they're not meeting up after school. And they are increasingly insecure. And there is this term, indefinite in their relationship. that simply means they can be friends with some romantic relationships, they can have sex but no promises, and therefore the relationships are not always clear but indefinite. They're increasingly irreligious. They're also very inclusive. They cannot understand the biases of their parents. A guy, for example, a son will get very upset when a father told him, I don't want you hanging around with that guy. You know he's gay. And the guy feels, so what? They are very inclusive. And yet, they are also very engaged in global issues like climate change. Think of Greta Thunberg, or the advocacy for the education of all women. Think of Malala, who was shot but survived. These young people want to change the world, and they are resentful, angry with the previous generations for what we in the previous generations have done to this world. They were born and raised in digital era. Gadgets are an extension of themselves. We, the grown-ups, use the same gadgets. We're communicating. I'm in the Philippines talking to you through this Zoom app. They're using this, we're using this, but we use these digital devices as tools. But for them, they are extension of themselves. They try to keep up with the developments in technology. They have to have the latest gadgets. They can't live without the internet. They feel the need to constantly check social networking sites. One of my patients said she just gets unhappy when she reads her social media, and yet she can't stop herself from doing that. And when I asked her why not, because she said, what if my classmates are talking about something that I did not know about? They have a word for that, a created word called FOMO, F-O-M-O, meaning fear of missing out. So they're driven to keep checking their social networks because they fear that they will miss out. And when they need information, the first place they go to is the internet and Mr. Google. They're fully immersed online more than any other generation. They spend, at the very least, more than 3 hours online. And they are very they watch TV programs online, they listen to music online, they create their own videos, and they browse online. And then Twenge made some correlations between these changes in the behavior of the young people and the risk of being lonely. And you know what came out? The relative risk of loneliness based on the amount of time spent on the digital, as shown by the black bars, would show that there is a greater risk of being lonely when one spends a lot of times with the digital, in contrast to their friends, the other members of this generation, who spend time in person social interaction, engage in sports and exercise, attend religious services, read print media, and are working. And when they check a correlation on the relative risk of high depressive symptoms and the use of digital media, the same pattern showed up. There is greater risk for becoming depressed when one spends a lot of time on social networking, TV, internet news, in contrast to those who engage in person-to-person contact, sports and exercise, religious services, reading from print media rather than on their tablets. And the relative risk of having at least one suicide factor shows the same thing. Those who spend their lives on electronic device use would have a higher risk of at least one suicide factor in comparison to those who spends time with sports and exercise. And of course, bullying has become a very common phenomenon. I guess those of us who are grown up had known what bullying is like, but we never really took it very seriously when we were in grade school, in high school, or in college. But now bullying is a major factor for depression and suicide risk. The role of sleep. The smartphone use may have decreased the teens' sleep time. A study showed that 57% more teens are sleep deprived in 2015 than the teens in 1991. Teens who don't sleep enough are more than twice as likely to report higher levels of depressive symptoms. We know this in neuroscience. Even if we don't have any serious personal problems, if we sleep only 4 hours a night, and every night we do that, we are very likely to develop anxiety and then move on to depression. Because the brain experiences sleep deprivation as a stress. Teens who sleep less than 7 hours a night are 68% more likely to have at least one risk factor for suicide. And now, this time of the pandemic, we have an enemy that's invisible. We are living in unprecedented time, like nothing we have known before. The enemy can be seen only in terms of news about morbidity and mortality, about the infection rate and number of people dying. And because we don't know the enemy, our immediate response was the usual response to prevent the spread of infection: personal hygiene, washing your hands every time you touch something, wearing masks, and social distancing, and the imposition of the enhanced community quarantine, which kept us all in our homes. Now, being at home 24/7 initially was welcome. I welcome it. It was time to relax. But when every day and every week it's the same thing, you stay at home with your family. Initially, it's bonding. After a while, it begins to become a heavy burden. It's like you're all in one place, bumping into each other. We start noticing the littlest faults that we have. So, there is an elevated level of stress and anxiety. Now, I must say that anxiety is normal. It's adaptive when we are faced with danger. It prepares us for run, escape, or fight, whatever is the source of the anxiety. So, anxiety is normal, but it can also cross the boundary of normal. And when do we know that anxiety has become toxic? When we are constantly worrying. We wake up in the morning and the first thing we worry about is the infection, the fear of getting infected, worrying about what's going to happen today, or someone is going to go out and you worry he might get infected. Changes in sleep, either difficulty falling asleep or you can fall asleep but marked with frequent waking up, so that sleep becomes fragmented. Changes in eating habits. We either grow heavy or we become very thin. So changes in emotion, always getting upset, irritable, feeling sad and angry. What are the sources of stress in this time of the pandemic? I would guess that number one will be the uncertainty. The uncertainty made us lose our sense of control. We don't know how it happened. We don't know when this will end. It's like we are living in this period of uncertainty. And the fear of getting the infection is always there. And the closure of community institutions like schools, malls, marketplace, places of worship, social gatherings had resulted in the loss of routine and financial insecurity because some people lost their jobs, some people are made to work only for shorter hours, and financial insecurity set in. And of course, there is an information overload available every time we turn the radio or the TV on. What do we need to watch out for in the family? First of all, the adults in the family must be mindful of their own emotional state before they can really begin to see signs of stress in their children and adolescents. Changes in behavior and emotion like frequent temper tantrums, hyperactivity, irritability. A child who had been so independent is now clingy and quiet and withdrawn, complaining of many somatic symptoms like headache, stomach ache with no organic explanations. Again, changes in sleep and appetite, difficulty falling asleep, frequent waking up, nightmares, poor appetite. In times of crisis, young people need the most attention, but ironically, they get the least because the adults in their lives are busy dealing with the crisis and their own stress. Now, is there really evidence that children and adolescents, this generation we call Gen Z, are significantly affected? We can take a look at some of the researches that have come out. In a survey of 1,143 parents, Italian and Spanish, the two countries most affected in Europe at one time, parents of children aged 3 to 18, they were simply asked whether they perceived changes in their children's emotional state and behavior. Close to 86% said yes, and these are the behaviors that they have observed: difficulty concentrating, boredom, irritability, restlessness, nervousness, feeling lonely, uneasy, worries. They saw this in their children. In China, 2,330 grade schoolers were given standard measures for depression and anxiety. 22.6%, close to 23%, admitted to serious symptoms of depression, and close to 19% reported serious anxiety symptoms. A survey of students who are going back to school in Great Britain showed the persistence of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty because school had taken a different form. This is now school from home. Online schooling. They were not quite ready for this transition. Normally, children look forward to going back to school after a long summer because they're going to be meeting with their friends. They're going to see their favorite teachers, But when told that there will be no school, no physical presence, but online, the transition had been very difficult. And up to now, many are still trying to adjust. Their relationships with friends and the school become fragile. Their self-regulation becomes disturbed. And adapting to this new normal has become a major challenge for them. What about parental stress? In the United States, about 1,000 parents were simply asked to rate their stress level. 46% of the parents with children under 18 said their stress level was very high, in comparison with 28% of adults without children. And persistence of the stress can turn into parental burnout. This is when parents feel exhausted early in the morning. They feel emotionally detached from their children. The children can be running around, and the mother or the father can be mindless of them. Loss of productivity and pleasure in one's parental role, changes in behavior, irritability, quick to anger. These are signs of burnout. All of these are experienced as stress. And how do we react to stress? Now, this is all premised on what neuroscience tells us, that our brain is very plastic, plasticity of the brain, meaning our brain adapts constantly to changing environment. It may get smaller or bigger. Brain is very responsive to our environment. Now, how does the brain react to stress? In normal amounts, that's desirable. Our brain makes us perform well, and we become motivated, and we adapt to changing circumstances. But when excessive, stress can cause recurrent symptoms: headache, insomnia, nightmare, muscle pains, excess anxiety, depression, poor appetite, inefficient. And when the young people were asked what were the sources of their stress, school is always number one. Home is a source of stress. Those who work find their work stressful. Personal relationships, romantic relationships, friendships become toxic. Their social media is a source of stress. And now, a major source is this pandemic. Let me just share a normal stress curve to show the relationship within the level of stress and our performance. When stress is very little, we're inactive, we're laid back, we're really not performing. As stress becomes optimum, we begin to perform very well. But if stress is persistent, then we slide down into anxiety, panic, and then breakdown and burnout results. Why is this? Because again, the brain is responding, reacting to a major stress, a persistent of stress. There are certain areas of the brain that are very sensitive to stress. The hippocampus, for example, which we know is our memory storage. It's a small part in the inside, deeper layers of our brain, which is our memory storage. Our prefrontal cortex, that is our thinking brain, the regulator of our executive functions, decision making, planning, organizing, prioritizing, seeing to it that we do what we need to do and finish it on time, control our impulses when inappropriate, regulate our emotions. The prefrontal cortex gets very affected. And a third area is the amygdala. This is a very important part of our center of emotions in the brain. So what happens to them? The hippocampus, our memory storage, and the prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, are reduced in size. And the amygdala gets bigger. No wonder when we are stressed, we're always emoting. We can't even think of problem solving. Our emotional functions and cognitive skills become compromised. And this had given rise among young people in increase in stress-related dysfunctions like anxiety, depression, non-suicidal self-injury. They cut, they hurt themselves, but they don't mean to die. There is increase in drug use and abuse, and notable increase in suicidal behavior. Suicidal behavior can include thoughts, plans, and actual act. I like sharing these slides. Take a look at the red line, imaginary red line in the center. It is normal for us to feel sad, especially in times of the pandemic. It's normal for us to feel nervous and angry and inattentive sometimes. But when did that sadness become a depression, a disorder? When did that nervousness become an anxiety disorder? When did we cross that red line? There are warning signs that should alert us. These are some of the warning signs we should not ignore when we see in our children. Feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. Seriously trying to harm oneself or plans to do so. Sudden overwhelming fear for no apparent reason. Intense fears, worries that get in the way. involvement in fights or desire to hurt others, severe out of control behavior that can hurt oneself or others, like a teenage patient of mine who in anger punched the wall and broke his finger. Not eating, throwing up, extreme difficulty concentrating, repeated use of cigarettes, alcohol, or even drugs, severe mood swings, drastic changes in the student's behavior or personality. School difficulties may in fact be a sign of emerging unrecognized mental illness. Poor attendance, frequent absences due to non-specific physical health problems may be signals that there is an underlying mental health problem. Difficulties with academic work, relating to their peers, adjusting to school, may be cries for help. And actual cries for help on social media. One of my patients who was recently admitted in the hospital, a teenager of 17 years, started texting her friends saying, I may not be able to see you again. Thank you for being my friends. Of course, the friends got alarmed and alerted the mother, and the mother found her having taken an overdose of her medicine. She was rushed to the emergency room, and we managed to save her life. She's back home now and feeling much better. What are some of the red flags for suicide? Actually talking about suicide, sending messages, like I may not see you again, or expressing I'm gonna kill myself, I wish I were dead, I should not have been born, being preoccupied with death in conversations, writings, or drawings. One mother checked the notebook of her son and found out there was nothing there except drawings of people hanging. One patient of mine was so interested, in love with the writings, the poetry of Sylvia Plath. And if we know Sylvia Plath, she was a depressive, great poetess and committed suicide. Giving verbal hints with statements such as, I won't be a problem for you much longer. Nothing really matters. It's no use. I won't see you again. Take all these as red flags for suicide. Seek help when you feel that's needed. The literature tells us that it takes 10 years from the first appearance of symptoms to actually getting connected to appropriate help, simply because we fail to recognize the early warning signs. But even before we seek help professionally, is there anything we can do for ourselves, for our children, managing stress and anxiety in the time of the pandemic? Remember to be kind and good to your body. Mental wellness begins with physical wellness. Sleep is a sacred priority. We have talked about that. Move every day, exercise. We know that exercise strengthens our immune system, lessens our anxiety, improves our mood because we release good hormones, the endorphins. We normalize the levels of dopamine and serotonin. These are important chemical substances in our brain. Find ways to move. Take a walk every morning. Ask your children to walk with you and walk the dog. Do online exercise. Maybe you can dance. Do the stationary bike and treadmill. Feed your body well. Go for healthy options like vegetables, fruits, minimize caffeine. Try to avoid alcohol. Follow a routine. Our body and our brain operates on a 24-hour cycle. We call that our circadian rhythm, marked by dark and light, marked by rest and activity. The lack of daily structure challenges our so we need to establish consistent routines of sleep, meals, exercise, bathing, doing homework, study time, house chores, more or less on regular schedule. Why is this important? The pandemic has made us feel we have lost control. Everything is so uncertain. When we follow consistent routine, we reestablish a sense of control in our lives. Be kind to your mind and to your life of the spirit. It's normal to feel sad. But if our mind is full of negativity, our mind becomes our worst enemy. And that normal sadness converts into a depression. And the normal anxiety converts into a disorder. We must feed our mind with inspiring, happy thoughts. I don't know if it's happening in Australia, but in the Philippines, everybody does the social media, and circulating in the social media are beautiful, inspiring quotes, and also laughter, a lot of jokes going around in social media. Feed our mind with inspiring thoughts, avoid negative thoughts, avoid an information overload, step back, promise yourself not to check the news today because it's going to be the same negative news. Get facts from credible sources like the WHO or your local health offices. Connect socially. Make use of the instruments, the tools that we have now. Social distancing does not mean emotional distancing. Call your friends, call your members of the family. Practice meditation. Neuroscience shows us that meditation helps calm our minds and anxieties. And there are so many apps available in the net. Practice gratitude. Notice things that are going right rather than dwelling on what is going wrong or what is missing. One day I woke up and suddenly realized that I have to be grateful for waking up because I know that on that morning, some people in this world did not wake up. Some people, even in my neighborhood, may not have woken up. We take that for granted, but every morning is a day to be thankful for. Practice kindness. We know the power of kindness to make somebody feel good. Look for opportunities. If you're a young person, offer your help to cut the grass in your neighbor's yard, Or if you're going to the grocery, call a neighbor and say, I'm going to the grocery. Can I pick up something for you? It makes other people happy. But you know what? It makes us feel good about ourselves. And above all, remember the power of prayers. Now, when we are stable, we have managed our anxieties and stresses, we can do our role of parents to the family. And what are some of these? Unconditional support when our child, when our teenager is anxious and depressed. Unconditional support. Focus on listening, not on lecturing. Very simply, connect first before you correct. Be gentle but persistent. What does that mean? Try to make him talk to you or her to talk to you. But if they just shrug their shoulder and say, I'm okay, don't worry, mom, be persistent. The next morning, try again and say, well, you say you're okay, but that's not what I see. I hope you and I can talk about that. Acknowledge the teen's feelings. Do not minimize. I'll say more about this. Get the depressed teen to talk to someone, maybe a school counselor, a favorite teacher, or a mental health professional. And as parent, make sure that they exercise, set limits to their screens, provide a balanced, nutritious diet, and make sure that they get adequate sleep. Talk to them. Spend time and attention. Show them how you care. And the talking should not be abrupt or intrusive. Nothing like, what's going on again? Why are you moping? Don't add any more problem. I have enough problem as it is. That will be the end of a conversation. Try to be just yourself, prepared to listen. Don't be judgmental. Try to be patient and accepting of your child's feelings. Acknowledge the seriousness of what they say. If they say, sometimes I feel like hurting myself, I know it's my fault, I should punish myself. Say something empathetic, like you must be really suffering for you to even thinking of hurting yourself. Communicate concern and reassurance. A simple statement like, Well, I may not understand fully what's happening, son, but I want you to know that I care and I want to help. Mhm. Don't don't do these things. Don't minimize the person's feelings or problems. Many parents fall into the trap of saying, listen, in my days I met a lot of problem and I solved them all, this is nothing. Or, so you broke up with your boyfriend, so why are you moping, why are you crying, there's so many other boys around. Don't ever do that. That's minimizing your daughter's or your son's feelings. Don't make statements that don't take their pain seriously. Don't make them feel guilty. Don't accuse the person of trying to seek attention again. And again, many parents fall into this trap. We try to solve the person's problems for them. We say things like, well, I told you, this group of people you hang out with, they are bad influence. I don't want you to hang out with those guys anymore, thinking that they are the problem. Well, maybe they're not the problem. Don't promise confidentiality about suicidal thoughts. You can encourage your child, but never say, don't worry, I won't tell daddy. Or don't worry, I won't tell mom. It's just you and me. When it's suicide, you break confidentiality. You have to be together approaching this problem and helping your child. Encourage positive mental health. We know its value. It's our full potential. We cope with stresses. We can be productive in our study and our work. We can make meaningful contributions to our communities. And how do we do this? How do we maintain positive mental health? This is just a summary of what I have been talking about in the last 40 or 50 minutes. Get physically active, exercise, get enough sleep, connect with others, help others, develop our coping skills and the coping skills of our young children, embrace our spirituality. And if the anxiety or the sadness persists, get help if you really need it. And with that, thank you very much for listening so patiently. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this with you.